Justice Maxwell Sterling wasn't always known for his unyielding courtroom demeanor. Long before he donned the robe on the Supreme Court bench, Maxwell was simply a man who cherished his quiet suburban retreat, a modest, stately home with a welcoming front yard that he'd painstakingly nurtured over decades. Every morning, as sunlight crept over the manicured hedges and delicate rose bushes, Maxwell felt that the garden was more than a patch of green. It was his sanctuary from a world too often mired in injustice and bureaucracy. Living in the upscale, yet surprisingly eccentric, community of Elm Crest Estates, Maxwell had always appreciated the delicate balance between privacy and neighborly camaraderie. His home, a classic colonial with deep-rooted history, had been his lifelong dream realized. It was here that he not only contemplated the weight of constitutional matters, but also found solace in the simple pleasure of tending to his flower beds. Yet, it wasn't just the beauty of his property that sustained him. It was the sense of order and dignity it represented, a counterbalance to the chaos of his high-profile legal responsibilities. However, not everyone in Elm Crest Estates shared Maxwell's reverence for order. At the helm of the community's homeowners association was Kerren, self-appointed, self-important, and notorious for her unyielding enforcement of rules that seemed to border on the absurd. Known around the neighborhood as HOA Kerren, she had a habit of policing everything from lawn height to the number of peonies that dared to bloom past an arbitrary deadline. Kerren's iron grip on what was acceptable in the neighborhood was backed by a cadre of equally officious board members whose primary mission was to maintain an image of perfection, regardless of the toll on residents' lives. The first sign of impending conflict came on a crisp autumn morning. Maxwell, in his habitual routine, stepped onto his porch with a steaming cup of coffee and a moment's quiet reflection on the day ahead. As he surveyed his cherished yard, each flower bed a tribute to years of careful planning, a neatly folded notice was affixed to his door. The missive, penned in Kerren's meticulously authoritarian script, stated that his excessively vibrant and improperly positioned ornamental lights violated the strict aesthetic guidelines mandated by the HOA. Maxwell was taken aback. He had never agreed to any such rule, having long valued his freedom to express the character of his property in his own way. "Mr. Sterling," a clipped voice called out as he moved to retrieve the notice, "you're well aware that rules are rules." Standing before him was Kerren herself, arms folded, her gaze unwavering and laced with smug superiority. "It's not a suggestion, it's a final warning," she declared, as though reciting a sacred decree. For a moment, the air between them crackled with tension. One side represented a man who had dedicated his life to upholding justice in the nation's highest court. The other a petty bureaucrat intoxicated by the power of her position. Maxwell's eyes narrowed slightly. "I appreciate your concern for community standards, Kerren," he replied in a calm, measured tone that betrayed nothing of the storm that was about to break. "But I must remind you that I never subscribed to any rule limiting the brightness or the positioning of my porch lights." His voice carried not only legal authority, but the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years interpreting and upholding the law. Yet Kerren's lips twisted into a haughty smile, as if the complexities of jurisprudence were of no consequence to her. In that initial exchange, the seeds of a conflict were sown. Kerren's overreach was evident. She was willing to trample on personal freedoms in the name of community conformity. Maxwell, used to balancing the scales of justice from behind a gavel, found himself facing a seemingly trivial but deeply personal infringement, a challenge that would soon evolve far beyond a mere dispute about porch lights. The first confrontation had set the stage for what would become an all-out war between an entitled HOA and a man whose career was defined by his unwavering commitment to the law. As the morning light grew, so too did the realization in Maxwell's mind. This was not just about a set of lights or a violation notice. It was about an abuse of power, a small but symbolic transgression that, if left unchecked, could herald a cascade of further intrusions into the liberties of his neighbors. In that quiet moment, with the cool breeze stirring the leaves and the distant hum of early traffic, Justice Maxwell Sterling resolved that his peaceful retreat and the rights of every homeowner in Elm Crest Estates were worth defending. And thus, with a calm determination forged in years of legal battles, the stage was set for the dramatic clash between a Supreme Court judge and a tyrannical HOA president. The following day, as dawn broke over Elm Crest Estates, Maxwell Sterling found himself thrust into the eye of a storm he had never anticipated. The once peaceful cadence of his morning routine was shattered by the unexpected arrival of an official-looking envelope taped prominently to his door. Inside lay a fine, a steep sum of $750 for an alleged community light regulation violation. The fine, official in tone and embossed with the HOA seal, left no room for interpretation. The HOA was taking its newfound authority very seriously. Kerren was waiting on the sidewalk, her posture immaculate, and her expression a blend of self-righteous triumph and condescension. "The rules apply to everyone, Judge Sterling," she intoned, her voice carrying a mix of arrogance and unyielding certainty. Even though Maxwell was a Supreme Court judge, an authority of the highest order, Kerren behaved as though she were the final arbiter of all neighborhood disputes. To her, this was merely a routine enforcement of standards, a minor infraction in an otherwise perfect community. Maxwell's initial shock quickly gave way to quiet indignation. With his calm, deliberate tone, he addressed Kerren. "While I respect the importance of community guidelines, I must point out that your claim is both unfounded and arbitrary. I have not violated any published regulation, nor have I consented to any rules that would curtail the way I maintain my property." His words were measured, laced with the authority of decades spent in the halls of justice, yet there was an unmistakable edge of challenge, a challenge not merely to Kerren's fine, but to the very overreach of the HOA. Kerren's response was immediate and dismissive. "Rules are rules, Judge. The board has decided, and you will comply." In that moment, the tone of the conversation shifted from a civil debate into a standoff of wills. Determined to safeguard his rights and his yard, Maxwell resolved to challenge this travesty of due process. Before the matter could be swept under the rug, he contacted the local zoning office, filing a formal complaint that detailed the blatant misuse of authority by the HOA. He meticulously documented every word, every signature, and every fine, confident that the law would eventually vindicate him. However, Kerren was not one to back down easily. The very next day, as Maxwell returned home from a long day on the bench, he found inspectors milling around his property. In their crisp uniforms and with clipboards in hand, they began scrutinizing every inch of his yard as if on a secret mission to find a violation. Maxwell's neighbors watched in a mix of curiosity and discomfort as the inspectors circled his home, their presence a clear sign that Kerren was mobilizing every resource at her disposal. "What are they looking for?" one neighbor whispered, eyes wide with concern, as the group of inspectors pored over the placement of garden ornaments, the alignment of hedges, and even the shadow patterns cast by his meticulously trimmed trees. Maxwell, however, remained stoic. Every minute detail of his property had been maintained with care, and he was well aware of the loopholes in the HOA's so-called regulations. As the inspectors continued their intrusive survey, Kerren strode past them and caught sight of Maxwell. "You see," she said loudly, ensuring that several of the curious onlookers heard her. "We're just making sure that every resident plays by the rules. No one is above the law in this community." Her tone left little doubt that she believed she wielded absolute power. Maxwell's internal resolve only hardened. Here's a case not merely of misguided aesthetics, but of deliberate overreach, a misuse of the HOA's power that threatened the very freedoms the community was supposed to enjoy. With the evidence he was gathering, he began to formulate a plan that would turn the tables. His mind, always analytical and strategic, was already working through legal precedents and local statutes that would soon expose the absurdity of the fines and the injustice of the HOA's actions. As the afternoon wore on and the inspectors departed, leaving behind a trail of disruption and discontent, Maxwell carefully preserved every document, every conversation, and every scrap of evidence. In his study, lined with heavy law books and illuminated by the soft glow of a desk lamp, he pored over community bylaws and local ordinances, determined to find the cracks in Kerren's facade of authority. By the end of the day, it was clear that Kerren's initial power move had only deepened the conflict. The HOA's fine, intended as a deterrent, had instead ignited a spark of resistance. And as Justice Maxwell Sterling prepared to meet the next challenge head-on, he realized that this battle was not simply about a set of regulations, but about the fundamental right of every homeowner in Elm Crest Estates to live without unwarranted intrusion. The weeks that followed saw the conflict intensify as Kerren, refusing to accept any challenge to her authority, resorted to increasingly desperate and, as it turned out, illegal tactics. Maxwell Sterling soon began noticing a disturbing pattern. Neighbors, once silent on minor HOA infractions, started whispering about Kerren's harsh methods. Fines levied for the most trivial of offenses, sudden inspections with no prior notice, and threats that bordered on blackmail. One sultry afternoon, as Maxwell was reviewing further evidence in his study, an unexpected visitor arrived at his door. It was a long-time neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Harper, whose anxious eyes betrayed her inner turmoil. "Justice Sterling," she began hesitantly, I overheard some board members saying that Kerren's been using our HOA funds for personal expenses." Her words, though softly spoken, struck a chord deep within Maxwell. Not only was he fighting an unjust fine, but now it appeared that the entire system was rigged to benefit a few at the expense of all. Determined to get to the truth, Maxwell embarked on an investigation of his own. Quietly and methodically, he began documenting every suspicious transaction, every inconsistent inspection report, and every whispered rumor that suggested impropriety. Hidden cameras were discreetly positioned around his property, and he maintained a meticulous journal detailing the dates and times of every unusual encounter. The evidence was piling up. Anonymous complaints suddenly surged against his property, and then there were those odd discrepancies in the HOA's financial ledgers, records that, upon close inspection, did not add up. At an emergency HOA meeting that was hastily called by Kerren, a murmur of discontent rippled through the room. A few board members exchanged uneasy glances as Kerren extolled the virtues of strict enforcement. "Our community standards are non-negotiable," she proclaimed, her tone leaving little room for debate. But in the crowd, one board member, Mr. Leonard Brooks, dared to ask, "Ma'am, have we not exceeded our mandate? There are concerns about the legitimacy of these fines and even questions about how the funds are being managed." Kerren's eyes flashed dangerously. "Mr. Brooks," she snapped, "if you have any issues with the rules, perhaps you should re-examine your role on the board rather than questioning the integrity of our operations." The tension in the room was palpable. Maxwell, sitting silently among the attendees, realized that dissent was slowly taking root. It wasn't just he who was beginning to see the cracks in Kerren's carefully constructed edifice of authority. Armed with concrete evidence and bolstered by the growing support of a few brave homeowners, Maxwell began to outline a counterattack. His plan was twofold. First, he would continue to document every instance of overreach and corruption. Second, he would prepare to challenge the HOA legally, armed with a dossier that not only proved the baseless nature of the fines, but also implicated Kerren in the misuse of funds. Each piece of evidence was a building block in what he hoped would become an irrefutable case against the tyrannical board. Outside, whispers turned into open conversations. Neighbors who had once remained silent now began to express their frustrations openly. "It's not right," one resident confided, "that we should live in fear of fines for every little thing, even our personal choices in home decor." The community was slowly uniting behind the principle that no one should be above the law, even if that person happened to be the self-appointed guardian of their streets. Maxwell's investigation also revealed further troubling details. In several instances, Kerren had issued notices for violations that didn't even exist, imaginary infractions that conveniently justified exorbitant fines. And when some homeowners attempted to appeal or even question these penalties, they were met with dismissive threats and even the occasional visit from a stern inspector, who arrived without any official warrant. Every step of the way, Justice Sterling's calm resolve and impeccable record in the courtroom provided him with the clarity needed to see the bigger picture. This wasn't merely a personal vendetta. It was a microcosm of bureaucratic abuse, a small battle that could set a precedent for every citizen's rights against overzealous rule enforcers. In the quiet of his study, amidst piles of printed emails, scanned receipts, and handwritten notes, Maxwell vowed that this injustice would not stand. The stage was now set for an epic confrontation. On one side, a determined Supreme Court judge armed with the truth and the law. On the other, an unyielding HOA president and her cohort, desperate to maintain control by any means necessary. With evidence mounting and public opinion slowly shifting, the battle was poised to escalate into an all-out legal and personal war that would soon engulf every corner of Elm Crest Estates. The narrative continues as Kerren's tactics grow even more brazen. One morning, Maxwell awakens to find his driveway inexplicably being excavated. Claiming that sidewalk expansion was necessary for community improvement, Kerren's orders had been executed without notice. Maxwell's carefully planned defenses are put to the test when he discovers that utility services have been temporarily shut off, an act clearly beyond the HOA's legal power. In a swift yet measured response, Maxwell assembles all the legal documents, community bylaws, and photographic evidence gathered over weeks. At the next HOA meeting, he strides in with an imposing dossier in hand. The once smug faces of board members turn uncertain as Maxwell methodically exposes every irregularity, from the unauthorized driveway work to the unauthorized utility shutoffs. With a quiet yet undeniable authority, he cites local ordinances and precedent cases that invalidate Kerren's actions. His words echo through the silent meeting room as he asserts, no one, not even an HOA president, has the right to seize the property rights of a homeowner. The room falls into a heavy silence, broken only by a few hesitant murmurs of agreement. Even some board members, previously loyal to Kerren, begin to question her motives. Kerren, now visibly rattled, attempts to salvage her authority with a barrage of counter-accusations. She claims that the measures were taken to protect community safety and ensure uniform standards. But Maxwell's calm rebuttal cuts through the rhetoric. When public safety is used as a pretext for personal vendettas, it is nothing more than a facade for abuse of power. With that, he unveils clear evidence, documents signed by rogue inspectors and contracts for unauthorized work, that leaves no doubt about the illegality of Kerren's actions. As word of the confrontation spreads through Elm Crest Estates, community members begin to rally behind Maxwell. Neighbors, emboldened by his defiance, share stories of similar abuses, tales of fines for harmless modifications and inspections that bordered on harassment. The collective outrage coalesces into a quiet but formidable movement. At community gatherings and over backyard fences, residents speak of reclaiming their rights, and whispers of a class action lawsuit start to circulate. In the wake of Maxwell's public stand, Kerren's panic becomes palpable. Behind closed doors, board members exchange furtive glances and hesitant remarks. "We never expected this level of resistance," one member mutters, while another frets over potential legal repercussions. Maxwell's detailed exposition has not only revealed the extent of her overreach, but also highlighted systemic flaws in the HOA's governance. His evidence, meticulously compiled and presented with the precision of a seasoned jurist, strikes a nerve with those who had quietly suffered under Kerren's rule. Even as Kerren clutches at straws, issuing further threats of lawsuits and declaring that order must be maintained at all costs, the balance of power begins to shift irrevocably. Maxwell's counterattack is more than a personal reprisal. It is a statement of principle that no bureaucratic tyranny can silence the voice of justice. As the meeting concludes, the community's mood is transformed. What was once an atmosphere of resigned acceptance now brims with a cautious optimism. Maxwell, standing tall amid the shifting allegiances, knows that this victory is just the beginning. The battle lines have been drawn, and the HOA's unchecked power is now under scrutiny. With renewed determination, Justice Sterling prepares for the next phase of the conflict. He begins coordinating with other homeowners to ensure that every instance of overreach is documented and shared widely. His strategy is simple: transparency, legal rigor, and community solidarity. In doing so, he sets in motion a chain of events that will force not only Kerren, but the entire HOA structure to answer for its actions. The stage is set for an inevitable showdown, one where the principles of law and individual rights will prevail over authoritarian whim. In this climactic chapter, Kerren, feeling cornered by mounting evidence and growing community dissent, resorts to one final, desperate gambit. Determined to crush Maxwell's defiance once and for all, she contacts the local police, falsely claiming that the judge's extravagant porch lights and nighttime yard displays constitute a public disturbance, endangering local safety. As officers arrive on the scene in response to her alarmist call, Maxwell calmly presents his Supreme Court credentials. The irony is not lost on the arriving officers, whose skepticism becomes evident as they scrutinize Kerren's hastily compiled report. Kerren's face pales as the situation rapidly unravels. Not content with merely invoking law enforcement, she takes matters further by clandestinely hiring a private investigator, someone who she believes might unearth dirt on Maxwell's past or compromise his reputation. But fate, as it so often does for those who abuse power, intervenes. Maxwell's security system, already enhanced after previous intrusions, captures irrefutable video footage of the investigator sneaking around his garage in the dead of night. When this footage is presented at the next HOA meeting, the assembled crowd erupts in outrage and disbelief. Maxwell's measured tone during the meeting contrasts sharply with Kerren's increasingly erratic outbursts. This, he declares, holding up a copy of the security footage for all to see, is not the behavior of a respectable leader. It is the desperate act of someone who has lost all moral ground. His words reverberate through the room, and even longtime supporters of Kerren are forced to confront the stark reality of her actions. As Kerren scrambles to defend herself, citing nothing more than vague threats and unspecific claims of disorder, the evidence mounts against her. Neighbors recall previous incidents, times when fines were levied without proper cause, when inspections were conducted with an iron fist rather than due process. Every allegation now fits into a larger mosaic of abuse and corruption. Maxwell, whose calm persistence has won him not only legal victories, but the respect of his community, stands as a beacon of justice amid the chaos. In a final dramatic confrontation outside the community center, Kerren finds herself isolated. Her phone rings incessantly with calls from concerned residents and even former board members demanding accountability. "I'm simply doing my job," she protests, her voice trembling with both anger and fear. "You'll all regret not following the rules." But her protests fall on deaf ears. The community, emboldened by Maxwell's relentless pursuit of truth, has had enough. Maxwell's final move in this chapter of the saga is as simple as it is decisive. He publicly announces that he will be filing a comprehensive lawsuit against the HOA for abuse of power, for violating the rights of homeowners, and for engaging in fraudulent practices. His announcement is accompanied by a detailed press release, meticulously prepared and distributed to local media outlets, that outlines every misstep, every illegal act committed by Kerren and her cronies. The document, a masterclass in legal clarity and moral rectitude, leaves little doubt that justice is finally on the horizon. As the meeting adjourns and Kerren retreats into a corner of the community center, the message is clear. Her days of unchecked authority are numbered. The evidence is irrefutable, and the public support for Maxwell, and by extension for fairness and transparency, has never been stronger. In that charged moment, the downfall of a despotic HOA president is no longer a distant possibility, but an imminent reality. With the scales of justice tipping decisively in favor of the homeowners, the once mighty HOA begins to crumble under the weight of its own corruption. The community, now united behind Justice Maxwell Sterling, orchestrates a series of meetings and votes aimed squarely at dismantling the old order. In one particularly dramatic gathering held at the community park, long-simmering frustrations boil over. Residents, emboldened by Maxwell's legal victories and armed with first-hand accounts of Kerren's abuses, cast their ballots to remove her from office. The vote is overwhelming. With Kerren's removal, the HOA board is forced to resign en masse, and the institution that once ruled with an iron fist is effectively disbanded. In the aftermath of this historic vote, the local government launches its own investigation into the HOA's practices. The ensuing audit reveals a labyrinth of financial improprieties, unaccounted funds, unauthorized contracts, and a series of fines that were issued without any legal basis. The city fines the now-defunct HOA for its many violations, and several of its former board members find themselves facing legal inquiries. For Maxwell, the victory is bittersweet, a reminder that the fight for justice is a constant battle, even in matters as seemingly mundane as neighborhood regulations. As word spreads of Kerren's dramatic fall from grace, her personal life begins to unravel in parallel. Once the indomitable face of Elm Crest Estates, she is now a pariah in the very community she sought to control. Her once pristine home is put on the market overnight, a silent testament to the collapse of her empire. Meanwhile, Maxwell, ever the epitome of quiet triumph, is seen each morning on his porch, savoring a cup of coffee in the soft glow of the early light, a stark contrast to the chaos that once reigned. In private conversations and media interviews, Maxwell emphasizes that this is not a personal vendetta, but rather a necessary stand for the rights of every homeowner. "This isn't about me," he explains calmly. "It's about every citizen's right to enjoy their home without fear of arbitrary fines and invasive inspections." His measured words resonate with a community that has long suffered under the tyranny of an unaccountable system. As the legal proceedings against the former HOA board and Kerren move forward, neighbors who once felt helpless now find their voices. Class action lawsuits are filed on behalf of hundreds of residents, and a wave of reform sweeps through Elm Crest Estates. The era of tyrannical oversight is over, replaced by a commitment to fairness, transparency, and, above all, a respect for individual rights. For Maxwell Sterling, the victory is not merely about winning a legal battle. It is the poetic culmination of years spent defending justice at the highest levels. With a quiet smile and a heart filled with the satisfaction of having set things right, he watches as the community reclaims its dignity, one small victory at a time. In the weeks following the upheaval, the fallout from the HOA's misdeeds becomes impossible to ignore. The city, spurred on by mounting evidence and public outcry, initiates a full-scale investigation into the former HOA's practices. Auditors uncover a litany of violations, from illegal fines to fraudulent financial records, and it becomes clear that the entire organization was operating outside the bounds of the law. Justice Maxwell Sterling plays a pivotal role in this phase of the struggle. Not only does he assist his neighbors in gathering the final pieces of evidence needed for a class action lawsuit, but he also offers his legal expertise to ensure that every violation is brought to light. His comprehensive legal brief, detailing every transgression committed by the former board, serves as a cornerstone in the prosecution's case. Within a matter of weeks, the HOA is fined heavily by the city, and several former board members find themselves under investigation by state authorities. Rumors of further legal consequences abound, and it becomes evident that the organization's reign of terror is finally at an end. Maxwell's final power move is a public statement that underscores the importance of accountability. When institutions abuse their power, it is our duty to dismantle them and rebuild on the foundations of justice. The legal consequences extend beyond fines and investigations. A series of lawsuits, spearheaded by disgruntled homeowners, are launched against the now-defunct HOA. The court's decisions in these cases set a precedent that reverberates throughout the community, ensuring that such abuses of power cannot happen again. For Maxwell and his fellow residents, it is a hard-fought victory, a reclamation of the rights that had been trampled under the guise of community standards. In the wake of the HOA's legal collapse, Kerren's personal life spirals into a dramatic undoing. No longer shielded by the authority of her former position, every misdeed and miscalculation is brought into harsh relief. The once confident enforcer of arbitrary rules is now forced to confront the consequences of her actions. Her public image is in tatters. Neighbors who once trembled at her name now greet her with disdain, and even former allies have distanced themselves. The dominoes begin to fall in Kerren's private affairs as well. Financial pressures mount as her extravagant spending, once hidden behind convoluted HOA accounts, comes to light. Her car is repossessed, and whispers of personal bankruptcy circulate through Elm Crest Estates. Compounding her public humiliation, even her family life is not spared. Rumors of marital discord lead to a very public divorce, further tarnishing her reputation. At City Hall and other public venues, Kerren is seen trying desperately to dodge fines and avoid accountability, an image that only deepens the community's scorn. For Maxwell Sterling, the poetic justice of it all is a quiet reassurance. He watches from his sunlit porch as Kerren, now relegated to a minor role in a neighboring HOA as an assistant property manager, stumbles through her new life. In a chance encounter at a local cafe, Maxwell crosses paths with her. With a wry smile, he remarks, "I hope you like following the rules." The remark, though lighthearted, is laden with the bitter irony of a woman who once ruled through tyranny, now forced to live by the very standards she once imposed. Her fall from grace is complete, a cautionary tale of how the abuse of power invariably leads to ruin. Kerren's personal and professional lives have become inseparable illustrations of how unchecked authority, when wielded for personal gain, eventually crumbles under the weight of its own contradictions. In the quiet aftermath of the upheaval, Elm Crest Estates transforms into a haven of newfound freedom and unity. The oppressive haze of arbitrary fines and relentless inspections has lifted, replaced by a vibrant atmosphere where neighbors share smiles instead of wary glances. What was once a community divided by fear and resentment now finds strength in solidarity and the joy of reclaimed independence. On a radiant afternoon, Justice Maxwell Sterling sits comfortably on his porch, the gentle warmth of the sun mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The air carries an unmistakable sense of calm. As he savors a rare moment of repose, a familiar face ambles by, an old friend from the neighborhood clutching a cleverly crafted violation notice. The playful note, adorned with humorous sketches and witty commentary on the past misdeeds of the HOA, is met with a quiet chuckle from Maxwell. His eyes twinkle with the satisfaction of a hard-fought victory, silently acknowledging the collective spirit of his community. Across the street, the scene is alive with the simple pleasures of suburban life. Children dart between meticulously kept lawns, their laughter echoing against the backdrop of freshly trimmed hedges. Neighbors gather in small clusters, exchanging anecdotes of former frustrations, now turned into humorous memories. Conversations flow easily, as if the shackles of an overbearing regime have finally been broken. The once tense streets have given way to genuine camaraderie and an openness that had long been suppressed. Later that day, as twilight begins to settle, a local news crew arrives to capture the remarkable turnaround of Elm Crest Estates. The segment unfolds as a poignant narrative, not of bureaucratic overreach or petty fines, but of a community that dared to challenge injustice, and, in doing so, reclaimed its voice. As the camera pans slowly over the transformed neighborhood, viewers witness scenes of spontaneous gatherings, friendly exchanges, and the simple dignity of homes that now stand as symbols of resilience. In a final memorable moment, Maxwell's measured voice rises above the ambient murmur of the neighborhood. Speaking directly to the camera, he reflects with quiet conviction. When those entrusted with power lose sight of the sanctity of individual rights, it is up to us to remind them that justice isn't granted. It's earned and protected by the will of the people. His words resonate like a benediction, encapsulating the essence of the struggle and the profound victory of community spirit. As the broadcast fades to black, the enduring message is clear. True authority is not imposed from above, but emerges organically when a community unites to stand for what is right. Elm Crest Estates, once marred by overreach and tyranny, now shines as a beacon of hope, a testament to the transformative power of collective action and the enduring belief that every individual's rights are, indeed, sacred.